already been turned into a miniseries. So
What?
yeah, the Sci-Fi Channel in 2000 and also in 2003 had a serialization of.
Oh my God. So you're adding another thing I have to wait to see until after I read the book. Motivating me though. It's motivating. It's motivational.
It's incredibly strange and kind of low budget and
Yeah. Oh, that's the best though.
yeah.
Yeah. No, we're the type of nerd that loves that. Are we good? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. Hello. For those of you who are maybe new, this is your first time joining us. Welcome. This is Books, Booze, and Brains. We're a science-themed book club. We read science-themed books, and we bring in wonderful guest experts who you will get to meet here in just a moment. I want to first start off by thanking everybody who helped make this possible, including Indiana Sciences, Indiana Humanities, obviously Ash and Elm. Again, if you have not ordered a drink, you have not ordered food, get on it because it's the bomb. And lastly, I'd love to extend the warmest thanks to our Indiana Public Libraries, without whom this wouldn't be possible, and who honestly need our support like now, like today. Yes, public libraries, yes! And you're welcome, Chrissy, my cousin, who is a public librarian here in Indianapolis. So with that, we're going to just kick it off because I have so many, I don't know, for those of you who read the book, saw the movie, I have so many questions. I know this is apparently a very divisive book in the sci-fi world. It wasn't for me. I loved it. And so did our wonderful guest here. And I would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself and what you do, research.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Charles Roseman, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Illinois in the Department of Evolution, Ecology, and Behavior. And most of my research is in genetics of one variety or another. And I do two types of genetics. One has to do with understanding how genetics works through development to produce skeletal form in mammals, and then how that predisposes mammals to evolve in certain ways.
Yeah.
And then also I have a background in anthropology as well, which is not something that I ordinarily admit in public, but the...
Wait, why not? Long story, okay.
Long story, that's for the internet crowd. So, but I also deal with issues of human variation and genetics in society. Oh. So I'm putting together a combating race science symposium at the American Association of Biological Anthropologists in Los Angeles in a few weeks.
Oh, wow.
And where we try to undermine a lot of the people who are using genetic sciences and towards racist ends in society.
Wow, that's incredible.
So, and I'm been a Dune fan for quite a long time.
I was going to ask, when did you read the books for the first time?
It would have been when I was 13 years old.
Okay.
A friend of mine's older brother was really, really into the movies but he sat down to show it to my friend and me, and he was really, really high at the time.
Love to see it.
And was fast forwarding through the parts and giving us the stoner rendition.
Stoner rendition of Dune?
Yeah, and which is appropriate at some level, but it would have been a lot more
interesting. The 80s? Yeah, let's go for it.
It would have been a lot better if he'd been on mushrooms or something like that. That would have been truer to the art. But and I mentioned this to somebody. I don't remember who it was, but they're quite a bit older than me, and they said, "Oh, you really ought to read the book. It's quite good." And so I ended up reading the book and got hooked, and over the years have read the rest of them, and I think I've seen all of the Dune material that's ever come out.
The material broadly.
Not the prequel books. That's not so great, but...
Interesting. I didn't even know there were prequel books for Dune. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I might have to get into those. Or maybe not.
You didn't hear it from me.
Yeah.
Don't do it until somebody else recommends it, otherwise you'll blame me.
Yeah, so, okay, that's fair. Yeah, and there is evidence for a court of law. So what do you think about the modern movie adaptations of Dune? Do you feel like it's true to the story? Do you feel like it gets the vibe, the zhuzh? Do you have critiques?
So the way I like to put it is that this was the third attempt to make a movie out of Dune.
Oh God, yeah,
Um,
it was.
In the 80s movie was the second attempt, and the first attempt completely failed in the 70s.
Love that.
And there's a documentary about that failed film called Jodorowsky's Dune, and it is
Oh, I've heard of this.
it
Yes.
is bonkers.
The documentary or the movie they tried to make?
Everything.
All of the above.
It's got a great sort of 80s style synthy soundtrack as well. If you're into that sort of thing,
Oh, yeah.
you sound like that might be up your alley. So,
Okay.
one of the things I like about Dune as a fan, and nothing you should say should. If I say anything about literature, don't believe me. This is me as a fan, not a literary critic.
Okay. Sure.
One of the things I quite liked about it is the way that Frank Herbert introduces these interesting contradictions that combine to that open up your imagination in very interesting ways. So it's really a very intimate story about family rivalry and a few other things like that. Lots of relationships, lots of relationship building and that sort of thing. But it forces you to think about, imagine the world on your own terms by introducing these juxtapositions of things that you ordinarily wouldn't think would go together. So the religious book is the Orange Catholic Bible. And you've got Catholic next to the color of the Protestant ascendancy. And, Zen Sunni Islam or Zen Sunni wanderers who are the precursors of the Fremen and that sort of thing. How on earth does that go together? Or my favorite are the fur whales. The fur whales on the planet that the Baron Harkonnen's half-brother Abelard rules. I don't remember the name of the planet, but I'm deeply ashamed of that.
You're in a safe place. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, the comment sections are going to be a wreck.
We're
But
nice people. We're nice people.
so they never describe a fur whale, but immediately something pops into your head.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you could think about what fur whales might be useful for.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a fur whale watching industry as well, in addition to getting them for their pelts and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so to circle back to the movie, it's hard to be true to the film in terms of an aesthetic or a way of going about it. You could make it incredibly gaudy, like the first attempt to make it was, somewhere in between, like the second attempt that actually succeed, or very austere, featuring brutalist architecture and dull tones and that sort of thing. And all of that fits in, and that's quite good. So I like that about it, is that one of the things I like about the different renditions of Dune is that you see it through other people's readings, and that gives you an insight into it that you wouldn't otherwise get. And this kind of links into the consciousness raising part of it, is that you're experiencing other people's acid trips in some way.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, what a great way to do it.
Yeah.
Reading a book, watching a movie.
and I thought it was well paced. And do you mind if I describe the scene?
You go for it. I won't be.
So
Spoilers ahead. Sorry if you haven't seen the movie.
This scene was a really good touch by Villeneuve, and it was after the sandstorm, after Jessica and Paul have escaped the Harkonnens with the help of Dr. Yue, and they've fled into the desert, and the storm is coming in, and they hide in an inflatable tent. Then the dune gets blown over them, and there's a scene. It's early morning where a mouse that looks like a kangaroo mouse with quite large ears hops up the dune, and there's a bit of dew collects in his ear, his extended ear, and dribbles down towards his eye, and his tongue comes out, and he looks it up, and that immediately tells you a number of things about the book. It immediately tells you that water is very important. The water, in many, many different senses, is extremely important. And it tells you something about ecology, because it looks like that organism is, adapted for that environment. And very skinny limbs, let's look into what you're talking about, and very large ears. This is good for maintaining a heat balance. It's a homeotherm, so a warm-blooded organism needs to radiate extra heat, that sort of thing, and is very, very, very careful about the water balance. And there are the wind traps that collect water in Dune, and that's foreshadowed by the ears of the mouse, which is a Muad'Dib, which is the name of Paul among Fremen.
So I want to talk a little bit more and get your perspective more on the ecology that we see in Dune, because this was something that I noticed in reading the book and not seeing the movie. I don't know if that makes me a bad person, but I'm a book first person. Thinking about the ecology and the ecological balance, they make it, we're obviously on a desert planet, sand, not a lot of biodiversity, not a lot of organic matter, but somehow this planet is able to sustain these giant worms. That feels ecologically unbalanced to me, but how realistic, taking that a little stretch, but do you see the book feeling unbalanced and unrealistic in that way, or are there examples of that kind of ecology that we could pull from?
Well, so, biology is full of surprises, and
Life finds a way.
You really shouldn't take anything I say about ecology all that seriously either. But Herbert got the inspiration for Dune on a psilocybin trip near Newport, Oregon, where the Oregon Dunes National Park is. And he was sent there as a freelance writer to write up about the ecology of the dunes and that sort of thing. And he really went overboard and collected too much stuff.
Oh, God.
And ended up looking into a lot of ecology and that sort of thing. And that's at a time where there was an idea that ecologies are in this fragile balance, where if you, in Keynes says something to this effect, if you tip one thing out of order, you get a domino effect. Turns out that since then we've realized that that's not necessarily the case. This is not good news in the sense that you might kill off something that is really important, but you would have no idea, and then all of a sudden everything goes to pot. But,
reassuring.
So it was a very good depiction of what a lot of people thought about ecology at the time.
Okay, interesting.
It's richly detailed, but in a way that it allows you.
Sorry.
It allows you to fill in a lot of the details for yourself as well.
Yeah. Which I like.
One of the things that's interesting is that Charles Darwin's last book was about how earthworms create their own environment and how then that environment feeds back to shape the earthworms through evolutionary time. Now, I don't think that Herbert had read that, but the parallels are striking. And I'd read Dune before that, and I couldn't help but think of these earthworms in an English garden as being like the sandworms in some way. So there were the idea that organisms are shaping their environments, and the environments then shape them over generations.
I see.
Is a important part of ecology and evolutionary biology. So he had an interesting sense of that I think works. Yeah. I'm not going to science fiction for realism, so.
You know what? And that's fair. But I mean, if you're doing your research, on a psilocybin trip, might as well write a sci-fi book. I mean, how much of your research do you think you could get done on a psilocybin trip? Do you wish you could come up with ideas that way? Got this grant due. What if I just took a trip?
It's kind of funny because.
Oh no. Oh no.
So if you've ever heard of the polymerase chain reaction, which was developed by Kerry Mullis. And what it allows you to do is to take a small quantity of a stretch of DNA and make lots and lots of replicates of it in the lab. And it's a sort of making a tool out of these thermophilic bacteria that you find in Yellowstone hot springs and places like that. And you can raise the temperature to pull the strands of DNA apart, cool it down, let the particular molecules of the PCR reaction and the various enzymes and that sort of thing do their work, and you repeat that over and over again.
Yeah.
So the story is that Kerry Mullis, the inventor, dropped acid when surfing and had a vision of the DNA molecule being pulled apart, and he just said, "Oh wow, I know what to do here." And evolutionary biologists are legendary for being potheads and that sort of thing. So a lot of it gets done under the influence, one way or another.
Hey, cheers. Cheers to that. I want to stay on this topic of the environment, and I love your example with the earthworm. That has to be related. There's no way that that's not related. But I want to talk to you maybe a little more related to your work. Thinking about a human species on this planet for thousands of years, are we going to see human adaptation beyond maybe, I mean, obviously in the movie you're not going to see that, but I imagine in my head when I'm reading this book, they're humans, but they've got to be different because you've been on this planet for thousands of years, you've adapted to this environment. Would humans adapt? Would you see like morphological, like physical changes to people living on an environment like that?
Well, you might.
Okay.
The most likely outcome is extinction.
Okay.
But
great for climate change.
Yeah, I'm known as a professional killjoy. I go around and I take everybody's pet theories and then destroy them. So that's sort of what I've made a career out of.
Love that.
But there's an interesting contrast in the book between the Sardaukar from Seleucus Secundus, the warriors of the emperor, and the Fremen. And Herbert makes a point that these are both hostile environments and they're going to, in effect, evolve hard people. Now, in the case of the Sardaukar on Seleucus Secundus, it's a prison planet where they send the roughest individuals. These are the ones who are so awful that and so good at killing or whatever that you don't execute them on their home planet. You send them to Seleucus Secundus to be part of a breeding pool for a super soldier program. Yeah. And it's set up that way. That's not what's happening on Arrakis with the Fremen, in that it's a more organic, less artificially selected environment. Yeah. So there really wouldn't be the tight connection, and given how precarious life is, it's probably, if you're going to evolve, it's probably going to be a little bit nicer to one another in a lot of ways. Yeah. But again, if you look at the way in which the Fremen are dealing with their environment through their technology, their culture, their practices, so on and so forth, you're dealing with a situation where a lot of the things that you might think cause natural selection differences in reproduction and survivorship, those may not be, your intuitions may not be very good when going in a real life situation. Yeah, fair. So, and a lot of it probably has to do with epidemic disease, which is, a lot of it has to do with child survivorship. A lot of it probably has to do with all these other things that you don't really see in the book. Yeah, well, maybe a little too much detail to ask from a man who came up with this idea on a trip, just saying. But I'm so glad you brought up the Fremen, because for my first Turn and Talk, which for those of you who maybe this is your first time joining us, our Turn and Talk, I'll give you like 5-10 minutes to talk about a question, a prompt, and then we'll come back and you guys can share what you talked about.
and then hate to, but there's probably going to be a lot of questions, and we'll probably ask for some of your input, and then we can share, kind of our thoughts on the book. And what I want to ask is about the Fremen and the Bene Gesserit. If I said that incorrectly, I'm so sorry. That's Southern public education. The Fremen and the Bene Gesserit, obviously two completely different organizations, to me shared a lot of similarities. And I went back and forth on how I thought of those organizations and their goals, and whether what they're doing is maybe just, or what they're doing is good or bad, which obviously I think the book paints this in an ambiguous way on purpose. But I would love for our turn and talk. I would love for you guys to ask yourselves and maybe ask each other, what were your thoughts on the Bene Gesserit and the Fremen? Did that change as you read the book or as you watched the movie? Did you notice similarities? There's a lot of similar, culty vibes. I think we can all kind of agree on the religious culty vibes. But I would love to know your thoughts on these two groups, ways that you thought they were similar, maybe ways that you thought were really problematic and you went, ooh, I got the ick. I know for the Bene Gesserit, there's a few. So I would love to give you guys like 10 minutes, and then we can come back and kind of share what we thought about those two groups. Thanks. Don't want to talk into the microphone because there's,
Right.
we have our live stream audience, which we love. Okay, I should have maybe just left it at Bene Gesserit, because I had to put the book down a couple times at like 2:00 in the morning when I was reading this. I had to put the book down and go, what did I just read? What just happened? What are these people? And as the book goes on, you piece together a picture of, oh, it's just like a weird school. It's like Monterosi on steroids. Oh no, this is like kind of witchcrafty. I get the title. There's like a eugenics camp going on. It like very quickly escalated. And I would, because you've read through all of the books, see, have a more complete idea maybe of these two groups. Do you see the similarities? Do you think they're between the two groups? And do you think those are purposeful to like pin two similar but different groups?
So yeah, it's important to remember that they're not in isolation. They're intimately connected with one another, in that the Bene Gesserits have a particular missionary program where they're sending out Reverend Mothers, they're priestesses, and integrating themselves into the local communities in just about any place in the galaxy.
Yeah.
So just that's a part of it. And the other thing to remember is, and they're purposely doing that. They're purposely feeding a set of ideologies and prophecies and expectations to people.
Yes.
Now, on the other hand, the Fremen are not somehow isolated, and the question that you want to ask about them is, why haven't the Harkonnen destroyed them?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there are a couple of references in the book to smuggling rings and any number of other things like this. Now, if you've got a desert planet, not that many clouds, why don't you just send satellites up? Well, it very explicitly says that the Fremen are bribing the Spacing Guild to make sure that all the satellites fail. Since the Spacing Guild has a monopoly on that sort of thing, they won't allow it to happen. They're very, and that keeps the Harkonnen in the dark about what's going on in the deep desert. And there are Fremen who are in the desert, and then there are also Fremen who are in Arrakeen and other cities. And so it's not a either or. There's a sort of this there's lots and lots of connections that are happening. So,
Yeah.
Why aren't the Fremen already dead is the interesting question here. And that's
Yeah.
because they're very, very cunning about making sure that that you can't collect intelligence about them. You can't get information about them.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe this is just me. Maybe this is just me. They make it seem like early on, I get the sense that the Baron is just kind of like, yeah, well, like they're not really a problem for me, so like I just kind of let them be. And they maybe don't even have a sense of how many there are, and they think it's just like maybe 1,000,000, not as many. They're like these weird guys that live out on the edges, the fringes, whatever. Like don't bother me. I'm good with you. And it seems like it's not until this conflict is initiated by Paul that the realization of there's millions. Oh, there's a lot of them, and this is actually could have been a bigger problem because it seems like if Baron wanted them gone, could have been taken care of.
Well, they're very good at deception. So if you don't look like a threat.
Yeah. Which, I mean, so are the Bene Gesserit. We're just crazy witches. Ha ha ha. We're just gonna have our own really weird programs and our weird trainings, and we're just gonna slip in and just let us be mysterious, but like not the case. Like so much more nefarious and so much more intent. And I don't know. I just reading. Obviously we haven't, by the end of book 1, we haven't gotten really, I think, into the meat of the Fremen, but we do, I think, get enough view of the Bene Gesserit to go, holy shit, what's going on here?
Yeah, and they have the breeding program is never really that well explained in the first novel, and that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And later novels that I'm not going to go into because I haven't read them recently, they flesh that out and simultaneously make it more confusing. So.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah.
Good things to look forward to. Well, but I mean, they even make it. I would love to know your thoughts too on, and maybe this is explained later in other books that I haven't gotten to yet. I think it's fascinating that the Bene Gesserit, it's a matriarchal line, except for Paul, the end all be all. Like that has to be a man. And I'm wondering, there have been critiques of the Dune universe, of the role of like female characters in the book. And I would love to know maybe what your thoughts. And it seems like, again, I haven't watched the movie. It seems like the movie maybe gives Zendaya's character a stronger role. And so maybe we see that. I don't want to say calling it fixed because you're not really fixing a problem in the book. But it's something that seems troubled readers for a long time with this series. I would love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but the later books get
worse.
Yeah, even creepier in a lot of ways.
Incredible.
But the so by way of explanation, one of the a couple what were the names? Irene and Ralph Slattery were they were psychoanalysts, and she was a student of Jung, and he was trained by one of Freud's students. So as soon as I say Freud, a lot of this makes sense.
Yeah.
Because Paul is not supposed to be the Kvisatz Haderach. He is.
Yeah.
Jessica was supposed to give birth to a daughter, who was then going to be married to somebody that later gets revealed, and will.
Yeah.
And she makes that decision. So all this mess is really Mom's fault.
Yeah.
So if you get a little,
fair.
And the witches are apparently modeled after this gaggle of aunts that he had, and his second wife Beverly was very much into the occult, and he apparently was genuinely convinced that she could read the future and had prescience and that sort of thing.
Oh God.
And
oh God.
Yeah, very early West Coast counterculture type of stuff.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
And Yeah. So, and it's one of those things where, um, yeah, it's a gender disaster area. If you had a guy who had read a lot of Freud and had his own mommy issues and was having Jungian interpretations of his dreams.
In
More or
that
less what you
context,
get.
it all makes sense. In that context, actually, a lot of what's in the book starts to make a little more sense. But that's a really good point. And that was something that I actually, after finishing the book, had I mentioned to you earlier. My husband is a U.S. history teacher. I had him give me basically his Cold War lecture, and I said, well, I was like, all right, it's been a while since I've been in a social studies classroom. Give me a rundown, because and I try to do this with every book that I read. For the Grand Falloon, Kurt Vonnegut Festival, when we read a Vonnegut book, I always try to. Obviously, Vonnegut's work is highly influenced and inspired by what was going on at the time and his experiences. And so whenever I read a book like this, I try to put it in the context of what was happening in the world at the time and in the U.S. And I hadn't even until like a week or two after it, because like I said, I finished this in one sitting, which I should not have done. But about a week or two after reading the book, I went, maybe some of my confusion and questions could have been answered by considering the context that the book was written. And I have another question for a turn and talk that I think we're going to get into that a little more. So I'm going to hold off.
All right.
But I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was not something I had thought about until much later. And it made a lot of it make sense. But the information about his family does help, because it does feel like it's a gaggle of female witches. So I think we're going to go ahead and come back. It's been about 10 minutes. Rufus, can we come back? I'm sorry. Yeah, we're good. I think so. Uh-oh. Okay. Yeah. That's fair. God, why do you have to be so popular? Why does Dune have to be so good, and why are you so popular?
Well, yeah. Oh, there we are.
It's a curse. It's a blessing and a curse. Truly.
Use the voice.
Yeah. Oh my. Yeah. I wish I had the voice. Honestly, I feel like I don't know. Would having the voice make your life easier? It has to, right? Or harder, because then now you have to like actually pay attention.
It'd be
be
hard to make
observant.
friends.
Yes. I feel like it would be hard to have like genuine relationships with anybody, because I could just tell you I could control you any way I want. I can't have a relationship, a friendship. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Consensus, the voice is not worth it. Unless you're like, I don't know, in the middle of a desert planet with like nobody. Maybe then it's really useful. Okay, so let's come back from our turn and talk discussion. If you are somebody who maybe has read more than the first book, I know technically we only read the first book, so maybe you only have some thoughts. If you're somebody who read all of the books, maybe you have a little more thoughts, maybe a stronger opinion of these two groups of people. But I would love to know what your thoughts are on these two groups of people, if you saw similarities or if you just have really strong thoughts, because I feel like my opinion of the Bene Gesserit changed strongly about every 75 to 120 pages. And I would love to know if others experience the same thing, or if maybe you always had the ick. You just, first 3 chapters, you went, no, I can't deal with these people. I would love to know your thoughts. I would love to hear like a report out from anybody. What did you guys talk about? What aspects of these two groups did you like, dislike, hold on to? Your thoughts changed? We talked a lot about the Bene Gesserit, obviously. I am so sorry. The Fremen are also great, but I feel like we don't see that until later in the books. What? Oh, yeah, and you can feel free to raise your hand if you would like to share, or if you have a question.
So we think the conclusion is the biggest dangerous groups with the power of recreational drugs.
The power of recreational drugs. Let's go. Dude. Okay, yes.
Yeah, so like, and yeah, I think literally, women could somehow control their own bodies instead that they could choose when to conceive, the sex of the child, and then when you give birth to your mother, they can control down to the atoms of the body somehow, and like, this doesn't quite make sense, but it's really cool. It's really cool.
Doesn't make sense. 10 out of 10. Yeah. Is there anything?
Well, so when you're making a Reverend Mother, they have to drink the water of life that you get from drowning a small sandworm in water. The water is toxic. Yeah, and it's kind of funny. Water of life. The Irish word for whiskey is water of life, ushkabaha, and
Did not.
there's also a Scots version that's more or less identical, but there are lots and lots of drug references, and depending on what variety of spice you get and in what quantity, it can have a variety of different effects. But this is pretty important. So Frank Herbert was a mushroom farmer for part of the time as part of his hobby, and apparently he sold mushrooms on the side, and grew really good magic mushrooms.
Hell yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, no, the power of a good trip, endless. Possibilities, endless. And then if you're a witch, also possibilities, endless. Through the power of observation, you can alter atoms. Makes sense. Sure, like why not? I love that. Is there anything else? Does anyone have any questions? We can also pause for questions. Or I can continue to ask you about your research.
Questions, please.
No, your papers are so cool.
Just to warn you that the unofficial model of my discipline, which is evolutionary genetics, is making sex boring since 1918. So
Stop.
what's about to happen is all her fault.
Okay, you cannot start out by saying, oh, so much cool evolutionary biology research happens on trips and through recreational drugs. Also, I make sex boring. That is not the tagline I expected. But so I do want to ask, if you were a scientist, if you were a researcher, kind of like the kinase of the universe, what would you be most interested in? Would you be interested most in the water, in the environment? Do you think your interest would still lie in evolutionary genetics? I'm just curious.
The effects of spice on scientific research.
Oh, the effect of spice. Yeah. Let's get into it.
As long as I didn't end up in the placebo control group, I'd be happy. But
this seems like a, single arm.
The hydrology is really interesting. So it flows through the system, and the relationships between different life cycles of sperm and water.
Oh, yeah.
And that's quite interesting. And also, it's not exactly clear, at least from the material in the first book, about how the sandworm life cycle works out. There are a couple of major gaps. So they might be like slime molds, where a bunch of these, small amoeba-like things come together to form a superorganism at some time. Or
I don't like that.
It doesn't.
Don't like that.
They're amazing. So, yeah, so it's unclear. It doesn't look like they're sexually reproducing, at least as worms, but you never know. So that might be interesting. A little inconvenient.
Just mildly.
Yeah, but.
Do you want to do research that could kill you? Yes? Have I got it.
I've met a couple of bear researchers who, they tag grizzly bears and polar bears and things like that. And
you know what? I'll pass. I'll stick with cells in a dish, or maybe even plants. We'll stick with plants. Seems much safer in this context. But you're right, and we really haven't touched on the spice. But before we get into, obviously, central theme of the book. I also really want to talk about the power of water and the power of natural resources that we see displayed throughout the book. And water is used as a source of control. And I would love to know what you think about how that plays into kind of the whole story. And this, I mean, obviously, the spice is not possible with plentiful water, as we see later on. Sorry if I just spoiled a central plot for you. A lot happens in between, fun fact. But it's almost like a no-win situation. And so what do you, I mean, we see in the first book, we see the scene where they're talking about, well, could we improve the water situation? Could we improve this, water balance? And everyone at the table is kind of like, what? No way. Like, we can't do that, when it's very obvious they could. And they don't, because they want to exert, their control, and they want to have that in their chess piece, and in play on their chess board, I guess, as an analogy. And so I want to ask you, how do you think, obviously this is a desert planet, water needs to be, to fit into the theme, water needs to be a relatively rare resource, but how important do you think the control of water is, and I guess that whole storyline is, to what we see in later books and what we see playing out even like politically?
Yeah, so you saw references to the greening of Arrakis, this ambition that the Fremen and the Kynes have to bring, and as part of their project where they're controlling dunes, and they're making areas where dew will collect, and that would be enough to grow cacti and a few other things like that. They're building an ecosystem that would transform the planet. But as I said before, the worms cannot tolerate water in any quantity. They'll die. And so if you have rain on Arrakis, you're going to kill the worms. If you have lakes on Arrakis, they can't live there. And since the spice, in the absence of computers, high-powered computers that you would need to do the calculations to navigate when you're doing the folding of space, you have in addition to the fact that just about everybody's addicted to it, and they go into horrible withdrawal symptoms and die young, and none of that is all that popular among the ruling classes of the universe. A little bit unpopular. Making sure at the grand scale that water is not free-flowing in Arrakis. It's there. I'll leave that. That's an important plot point for later. But it's not. It's secreted away by a number of mechanisms. When it comes to control of water, this is something that we face with climate change even more, and it's something that we face in a lot of different parts of the world, where it's very easy to get, say, a bottle of Coke or cola product by an unnamed bottling company with worldwide reach. It costs about as much as the water that's in the fridge next to it, and you can't drink out of the tap. So water is being monopolized in a lot of ways in poorer countries, and we're even having trouble in the United States with the breakdown of infrastructure. Flint, Michigan being a prime example.
Oh my gosh,
so,
yeah.
Something that we don't really think about is the way that water runs our lives here. And it's nice to get a little bit of a reminder of what can happen in genuine scarcity of it.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see more of this? Do you think this whole book is just a giant climate change, like neon sign warning that was written in the 60s that we just have ignored? Like every other climate change sign we have ignored since about the 60s?
No, I don't think it has much in the way of warnings about climate change per se. It's more about unquestioningly following dogma and charismatic leaders and things like that. It's also got a very West Coast California style self-improvement mission. Everybody's trying to improve themselves or come up with the perfect human or the perfect version of themselves. So, it's sort of a presages the self-help book era in some ways, and it's a reflection on religion. But I don't think it had much to do with climate change per se, beyond saying that it's important to understand your ecology.
That's fair. I want to go back to the comment you made just a few moments ago, because I found this fascinating, and I would love to know what you think about this. Most sci-fi that we read takes place obviously in the future, like Dune, but is usually a central theme to a lot of sci-fi, I'm not saying all, is technological advancement. And here we explicitly see the opposite. We see we don't trust machines. We shouldn't trust machines. Machines is what brought us here. And we see this backing away and shying away from technology. What do you think? I mean, obviously this has a place in sci-fi because it is in sci-fi, but what do you think about a sci-fi book that's not technologically advanced like most sci-fi is?
Yeah, this is a really good trick because it allows you to reflect on humanity in a slightly different way. So as opposed to being worried about our own creations coming back to destroy us, they already dealt with that a long time ago and ended up winning against the machines. But did humans win in any sense? In that, if you the first precept of the Orange Catholic Bible, which is put together by this crazy group of ecumenically minded scholars from all sorts of different religions, and they just kind of threw up their hand, and now it's just kind of a mess of a thing. But the one thing that they could agree on was that you don't remember the wording, but thou shalt not deface the soul, thou shalt not violate the soul. And that is, make a machine in the image of a human. But so where technology can kind of alienate us from our humanity or subordinate humanity to technology, in this case, it's all humanity doing it to ourselves. And while humanity as an idea, as a species, as a abstraction is sacred, any one human is pretty much negotiable depending on their circumstances. There are all manners of horrors that go on in the universe where people are exploited, enslaved, whatnot, are genetically modified, any number of other things like that. And that's all okay. Making sure isn't that smart is the important part. So in this case, it's not us doing it to ourselves with technology or technology turning around on us. It's very much directly a alienation of humanity from humanity on its own terms.
Yeah, I reading that, I immediately thought of all of the AI books we've read and some of the computer science experts we've had, and I thought, I don't know if they even really knew about AI in 65, but this feels ominous. He was onto something on that trip. He was onto something for sure. And I want to turn, I think this flows really nicely into our next turn and talk. So earlier this morning, I was listening to an interview that Frank Herbert gave about the writing of the book. I can't remember if this was in the late 70s. I think it was in the late 70s. And I want to read you this quote from Frank Herbert. And I want you to think about it and talk about it in your turn and talks. Because this is one aspect of the book we haven't really touched on, which is the politics of the book. Obviously, huge theme, but we haven't really talked about it. So I want to read this quote to you from the author, and I'll give you like 10 minutes for the turn and talk, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it. But this quote is from the author, Frank Herbert. So Frank Herbert says the message of the book, and this is a direct quote, "Don't trust leaders to always be right. I worked to create a leader to be a charismatic and attractive person for good reasons, Paul. But power comes to him and he makes decisions for people, decisions for millions and millions of people that don't work out too well." How does this quote from the author, he designed a good charismatic leader on purpose for him to make bad decisions, to make you think about leaders and leaderships. How does this quote from the author, knowing his intentions with the character, make you think about Paul and make you think about Paul's actions? Give you a few minutes and we'll come back. Thank you. And this is what I'm coming back to. Cold War era US. And that quote in that interview is why I asked for the 45-minute US history lecture from my teacher partner.
Yeah, I've got something to say. I'm going to be very interesting.
Give it to me.
I'd like to. No.
Oh, you want to share with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. I will ping you. I will remind you. But he makes it clear that, you know, the intent of this book is for you to leaders in leadership and to think. I mean, you know, we're in Cold War era U.S., post World War II U.S. We're in the alliance making game. There's so much happening, and there's so much of doubt. I think he said his favorite president was Richard Nixon because it made the American people distrust the president, and that was his favorite part. And so, what do you think about the leadership that we see in Dune and how there's really no black and white, good and bad character? Paul's set up to be a good character, but he's kind of set up to fail by the author.
Yeah. So the nice thing about the original book, the first book is the first novel, is that towards the end, it's not exactly clear if he's the Kuzak Haderach or if he's the just a really crazy charismatic leader. That gets worked out in the later books, but so this gets into another theme in the book where there is a passage in the appendix on religion where it goes through how religion gets used in the universe, and the leadership is, they can quote it, chapter and verse, but they don't really believe it. They don't really follow it. Things like that.
Yeah.
They just know that there are certain lines you don't cross, and that's about it. But one of the finer points in this is that the purpose of religion, by the religious scholars' own admission, is to remind people that they can always be better than they actually are, but they'll never be perfect in any way.
Yeah.
It's always reminding you of your shortcomings.
Yeah.
And so that's I'm not sure what that does, but you could see that theme in the book, this sort of self-improvement theme that's always happening, and there's always this dissatisfaction with humans the way they are, so we have to modify them through some breeding program or genetic engineering or whatever.
Yes.
And if you can make a computer out of a human by training them to do all sorts of crazy calculations like the mentats, if you can make a doctor almost totally loyal to you with some exceptions,
Clearly.
if you can make the blade masters who are just combat wrecking machines, all that sort of thing, why not make a perfect leader as well, and see what a disaster that might end up being.
Yeah.
Especially if they can tell all the other weirdos what to do.
And which, you see with the Bene Gesserit saying, well, no, we make the best leaders. They actually know the right things to do, the right things to say, and that's why we should be responsible for making them, training them, putting them where they need to be, because we're the best. Mm-hmm. But it was a theme that I had thought about through the book, and it was just something that listening to the author speak on it and say, no, more people should distrust and not distrust. I don't want to say that. Well, no, that's actually exactly what he said. Distrust your leadership, and you should question their decisions. And another great quote from that interview was, the mistake of every leader is amplified by every person who blindly follows and trusts in them. And that is ultimately Paul's situation that we see, obviously, later than book one. Because book one, he just decides what he's going to do. Book ends, and he's like, yep, I'm the guy. Yep, we're starting a war. Let's go, Mom. My favorite thing to say to my mom, hey, let's go start a war. After I just watched not watched, but no, my dad just died. But I mean, do you think that really speaks to the times, though, that this book was written? I mean, mid-60s. I could almost piece who the author was envisioning for, Baron Harkonnen and, Paul. And, I feel like I see very, not one-to-one, but pretty close relationship to what was happening politically.
Yeah, I as we'll get to in the audience, I think it's even more direct than that. And the one thing I will say is that, not necessarily related to politics at the time, but something that influences politics later, is that he's very much a part of that bohemian counterculture early on. You'll end up with the hippies and all that sort of thing. And of course, then all these hippies turn into, Reagan voting yuppies, and who want theirs. They're totally independent of everything else. I forgot who said this. They're a bit like house cats. They think they're gods, but in charge of their own destiny and so on and so forth, but are wholly dependent on a system that they can't comprehend or even aware of. So,
I love that, Reagan voting yuppies. I've never heard that before in my life.
I think it was originally about libertarians, but it still applies.
No, I love that. I'm keeping that. I'm keeping that one in my back pocket. I don't know when I'll need it. I'll need it.
Works for college professors too. So.
Oh yeah. Do you use Dune in your teaching? I feel like this could be a great book for intro, a fun. I don't know. Do you ever reference it? See if anyone gets it.
No, I don't really use it in my teaching. That's an interesting thought. I'd have to mull that over for a while. But
yeah,
I think with the new movies, there's a new generation of people getting into it. So why not?
I gotta tell you, I had never heard of it. Didn't realize there was a book when the first movie came out. And then, the second movie's coming out this Friday. And we said, oh, well, we should read it for our book club. And I said, oh, I didn't realize there was a book. And now, what do you think about the illustrated? There's an illustrated version, correct, of Dune? I thought there was an illustrated version. Or maybe they're just assortment of illustrations that have been...
Yeah, each of the movies, including the one that wasn't produced, has a bunch of images floating around in various volumes and things like that.
Okay. Interesting. I thought it was, I don't know. I thought somebody told me it was like a comic book style, and I'd never heard of that.
Might have been.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a comic book person, so really? I don't. I think my attention span is a little too long. I just blow through it. I don't really appreciate the art form, I guess. So.
Yeah. That is what the comments are going to get you for.
Yeah.
Not anything else you've said, but that. You're going to get hate.
It's mostly because a friend of mine named Greenberg. But
Okay. I said this wasn't a violent crowd. It might be. Well, it might get violent.
As I was saying to you during the warm-up, it's how unusual nerds getting into a fight over something that's really trivial. But I should say that the comic books I do like, I grew up reading the Asterix and Tintin books, the Belgian and French comics.
Interesting.
And so, to the extent that I like comics, it's more of that Euro style type of thing.
That's fair. Now, have you, and I mentioned this before we started, I did not realize Dune was a divisive book or divisive world, I guess, until I was doing a little more research on the author. And I mean, a lot of people, not just like, oh, it wasn't for me. It's a DNF for a lot of people, and they hate it. The world building's awful. The characters are bad. The storyline's bad. I don't see it. But have you run into a Dune hater? I mean, can you convert a Dune hater, or is it just they don't like the world building, they don't like the world, it just is what it is? I mean, this feels like to me a sci-fi book. A lot of the people who don't like it say it's not a sci-fi book. How is this not a sci-fi book? How do you not like this? Leave me a comment. Leave me the hate, because I will fight you. What is not sci-fi about this? Because there's no tech, flying car. I mean, what do you want? We have lasers. Be happy.
Giant worms.
Lasers and giant worms.
Yeah, and so much of what followed in Star Wars and the Warhammer 40,000 universe. That's basically a giant ripoff of Dune.
Ooh. All tea, all shade.
Well, it's not shade. It's pitch darkness. So, Roddenberry might have gotten the idea of for the Vulcans, Spock, from the Mentats and things like that. So it was incredibly influential. So even if you don't like Dune, you do like something that borrowed or ripped off Dune. So that's the way I would put it.
Oh my God!
Mm-hmm.
The Star Trek. That's all right. I'm done.
So, Dune haters, hate away. You like something that like Dune. I guarantee you that.
Oh my God. We got it. Okay, Riffs, I need you to bring me back. I need you to bring me back. I think we're about to get canceled. When is Gen Con is coming up faster than we think. And I'm sorry in advance, Rufus, because I think we might get...
Yeah, I have a preternatural ability to offend people, so in really bespoke ways.
Yeah,
so I'm proud of myself.
I appreciate it. Anybody watching this, leave a comment so I don't have to read it, because joke's on you, I'm illiterate. Okay, so I would love to come back from our turn-in talks, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the author's quote, on Paul, on the politics of it. I would just love to know if anyone else came away from it, reading that quote, maybe thought differently about Paul's actions. Because he is set up to be, he is like a great leader. He's morally in a great place. He's got great ideas. And the decisions come later. But if you put your hand up, I'd love to give you a microphone and let you share your thoughts on Paul. Maybe you think Frank is Frank. Maybe you think the author's you don't like the quote. Paul's a good guy. Quit giving him flack. He's doing the best he can. His dad died. Give him a break. Dad died in the desert with his mom. Come on. Be gentle. Or not. If you're gonna lead like millions of people into war, I don't know. Maybe you should make a good decision. That was political. Wow. That was a political statement. Oops. So you actually had something you held on to this. You said, I don't want to talk about it in our one-on-one. I want to share this with everybody. And I promised you I'd remind you. I'd love for you to give your thoughts or what you were going to say.
Okay, so during the discussion period, we were talking about the political context in which Dune was written. Cold War had ramped up. It was around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, all this sort of thing. And so is all this talk about charismatic leaders related to that? And it is, but in a really direct way, in that Frank Herbert worked for a number of congressmen as a speechwriter and a copywriter and things like that, where he just churn out announcements and write speeches for them, and they were all Republicans. And he was also a distant relative of Joe McCarthy. So he was circulating at that time and was really horrified by somebody who was charismatic using the bully pulpit to ruin people's lives. So that might be a part of it.
No, it's okay. That's okay. No, that I did not know that, and that is just even more context that I needed to, I think, to fully appreciate this book. But so I'd love to know if anybody had any thoughts on Paul's actions, especially knowing that the author, it was very intentional. I mean, obviously he wrote the book. Very intentional with setting up Paul in a certain way to lead into, I don't know, 2 more books and another movie's worth of material. Yep. Yes, I think so. I hope so.
I have the sense it would be a different answer depending on whether you're writing kids' books. I read the first book of the actual character of your dad, and he's trying his hardest to prevent this war, this denial.
Yeah.
So, it's like, okay, yeah, people always not apologize, but if they feel that
Yes. Yeah. Hey, same. That's fair. And we did technically only read to the first book. So you're right. Up until this point, I'm on Paul's side. I'm with Paul. That's my campaign button. I'm with Paul. If I'm a Freeman. But that's a really good point. Yeah. 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 I don't know. What do you think about Paul as we get into the later books?
So I would say that you're seeing the setup for the fail at the end of the first novel. And we're not talking about the first book of the first novel, right? We're talking about the first novel?
Yes.
All right. He gets sucked into the imperial system. He, instead of being this revolutionary leader, he becomes a part of a system. He becomes more like a reformer. And he marries, or is engaged to Princess Erlon, with Chani still on the side, I guess. And that's a kind of a compromise that sort of sets things up. I think it's a foreshadowing of what's to come. And because he made a political pragmatic compromise as opposed to following a vision. And that's ordinarily we would say that's stepping away from being the charismatic leader, but that's what they end up doing. So.
And I will before leading into Q&A, I will leave you this other quote that I thought was hysterical that Frank Herbert gave in the same interview. He said his favorite president was Richard Nixon because it made the American people distrust the president. He said they finally distrust the presidents, and that's really what we should be doing the whole time. And that was his whole kind of arc and purpose with Paul, which I thought was hysterical. But with that, I want to give an opportunity for you guys to ask our incredible expert, Dune expert, awesome, really cool researcher. I did read your papers. I'm so sorry.
Well, I'm glad you stayed awake. That's better than most people. So.
When I was 10, 11 years old, and my mother can attest to this, I used to come home from school and go on Wikipedia because I thought it was so much fun to click around and read all the different pages. So I did not fall asleep. I was 10 going, ooh, Wikipedia. I don't know if that's a shared experience. Maybe I'm an N of 1, but I would love to open it up. Ask our guests. Talk about Dune. Ask about Dune. Dunes. The Dunes? Oh, yep. Oh. Uh-oh. Oh no. Yeah, I'll repeat the question. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 It's a great question.
Yes. So um, in the popular world, genetics is kind of the sorcery of our time. In that, when the Human Genome Project was being advertised and lobbied for the funding, it cost billions of dollars. It's a was very expensive.
Yeah, it was.
It's much cheaper to sequence a genome these days, but you don't get as much credit for it. Um, and you know, Francis Collins said something along the lines of that we're going to be able to read out the human condition in the handwriting of God, and we any number of other statements like that. Jim Watson said that we used to think that our fate was in our stars. We now think it's in the genes. So there's lots of this religious and occult language that goes along with it, and this is reflected in lots of science fiction. So it becomes it takes the place of a lot of sort of ancestor magic and a lot of birthright and nobility that we would attribute to magic, sort of King Arthur style, where you're fated to it. Genetics is not nearly that interesting, nor is it all that powerful in terms of genetic modifications. They're good reasons to be careful about it, as with everything else. But lots and lots of foods are going to be already genetically modified, even if you think they're organic, because they've been bred in one way or another. Yeah, corn. Hybrid corn is a good example. University of Illinois, thank you very much. What has Indiana ever done for us?
Basketball question mark?
He was Canadian.
I'm new here.
Sorry. So people are suspicious of it because the scientists advertise it as witchcraft, as magic, as something like that. Now you see this in Dune as well. So Peter de Vries, the twisted Mentat, the clone from the Tlalexu, who are the genuinely really terrifyingly awful group of people who do the genetic engineering. De Vries was the name of the guy who came up with the word gene. So gene. The gene was invented by a guy named De Vries. Not the concept, but the word. And so that, and certainly there's sort of a raving little eugenicist in most of my students that you need to coax out and then smash. And it's a big challenge, because it really is the magic of our time in a way that's kind of similar to computers and artificial intelligence and things like that. But
I always like to joke with my husband every time I get like a vaccine shot. I'm like, oh, I'm a GMO. I know I'm not, but I like to think it makes me a GMO. I wear it like a badge of honor. Maybe that should be my next tattoo, GMO. That'd be sick.
Yeah, I won't tell you what I say, but
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
yeah,
That's fair. Let me live out my crazy tattoo fantasy.
I can hear Bill Gates talking to me, but the stock tips he's giving me are really terrible. I've lost lots of money on Wall Street because
Bill, I needed it 30 years ago. Come on. What are you doing? Is there anything else anybody would like to ask our guest expert while we're here? Also, you can come up afterwards, give us a chat. Quick show of hands. Is anybody planning on seeing the second movie either Friday or this weekend? Is anybody? Okay, pop off. Let's go. Okay, so this was perfect timing intentionally. Have fun. Like I said, I'm a book purist. I have to finish everything before I can even see a trailer. All I know is Timothée Chalamet's in it because I've seen his face 100 times. Yeah. You're not allowed to have questions, Rufus.
Well, I don't know. So this is the fan in me talking. But there were a few other novels that he no doubt read from very early in the production of science fiction that dealt with technological decay and fall of civilizations and things like that. But also at the time, everything was progress. This is the go, go, go 50s where you have interesting new innovations coming out. You're curing morning sickness. That worked out great. You're doing any number of other things. The wonderful insulation materials like asbestos, all these new things are coming out. All the wonderful gelatinous foods you could concoct. DDT, forgot about that one. Ashamed of that. But lots and lots and lots of progress. And if that's the theme of the time and you're interested in dragging somebody into a new kind of world, why not set up a juxtaposition where it's something that's completely alien in the sense that you expect better things, and in this case, the better things are other human beings and the horrible things that you go through to do that. So it really turns it around. But I'm not a literary critic, and that's just like my opinion. So,
That's so fair, though. No, I think that's a really good observation because you're right. There's a lot happening politically, but I mean, also there's a lot happening culturally. Yeah, and I mean, I almost want to point out even just the integration of some of these advances, how fast it's hitting people's homes. This is not something that stays at work or stays, in this other. It's becoming so readily accessible so quickly, and I wonder if that during this trip you go, oh, man, this is not going to work out. This is not going to work. And I almost wonder even, I mentioned the Vonnegut books earlier. Player Piano has like a very similar like technology bad vibe. And I mean, I don't think that was written in 60. I don't think that was written in the 60s. Oh, it might have been late 50s, early 60s. So I'm wondering if that was just like a general dystopian trend that a lot of people were hesitant to adapt to these new technologies. I think that's a really good observation. And something that I will also ask my social history teacher husband about when I get home. So I get another 45-minute lecture, 2 in a week. That's pretty good for me. And so with that, I just want to first off start by thanking you. I want to start closing out by thanking you for coming, thanking you for being an incredible, not only expert, an awesome researcher. Also, thank you for being a huge fan of Dune, because obviously that helped not only enhance kind of our experience of your time here, but also has helped motivate me to finish all of the books. It's a lot, but I'm now more motivated than ever to stay up until 4 a.m. every day until I finish this. I also want to thank again Indiana Humanities and Indiana Sciences for helping make this possible, and thanking our public libraries, and always thank you, Chanel, for making awesome booze, awesome food, and allowing us to come here. So I want to thank you all so much for coming out. We read this book on the precipice of the release of the new movie. At the end of next month, we'll be reading a book about eclipses, just in time for the eclipse. And we have an incredible professor of physics from IU coming, who is a hoot and a half. And I say that with the most Appalachian love I can. So with that, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next month, and have a safe travel home. Bye.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And thanks for, like I said, motivating me to finish these books.
Oh, no. It'll be a good experience. Just don't read the prequels on my recommendation, or lack thereof.
Yeah. No, that's a good recommendation, though. It sounds like it's a solid one. And it sounds like maybe we should bring you for Gen Con.
I might be a Gen Con. So.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Word? Word? What? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can I